Education at its worst, when higher education can damage both prosperity and equality. By Andrew D. Atkin, 11th of January 2015, and my blog is Building Utopia. Of course you don't need a degree to get a job in Walmart. But let's take the scenario that you did have to have a degree because someone somehow managed to force this educational prerequisite onto the field of retail and sales. Let me show you how this stupid educational demand becomes its own justification as it serves to drive up the price of retail labour, and just because the demand exists. The direct result of demanding a degree is that people leaving the retail profession are not replaced. Because no one would want a degree in retail and sales, because the profession, as it stands today, only offers a somewhat low-paid job. However, over time, as people leaving the profession are not replaced, you would find the developing undersupply of retailers drives up the price of their labour. In time, it would get to the point where retailers are starting off on, say, $25 an hour. From this point, it would in fact make sense for people to spend 3 years in a university so they can then become highly paid retailers. In turn, your so-called higher education becomes its own justification. By functioning as a barrier to accessing the retail profession, higher education controls the worker supply coming into retailing, which in turn controls what the workers are finally paid. So who wins from this? Well, the consumer certainly doesn't. They are the ones who have to pay for the overpriced retail labour via the product markup. But the consumer pays more still, indirectly. They pay for the fact that the retailer wasted 3 years in a tertiary institute learning probably nothing much real, and likewise not contributing to the economy, nor paying any tax during their learning time. And the consumer pays further still through their own taxation if the tertiary education is subsidised. And also, a retail worker can enjoy an artificially inflated wage. A wage that everybody else has to pay for. What a crazy, stupid mess that would be. It's also a great example of how higher education can induce inequality and on false grounds, and damage economic prosperity all round. When higher education is not relevant in terms of lifting people's productive capacity, it can be and will be socially toxic. So here is the real question. To what degree is tertiary education in New Zealand relevant? That is, creating people who can do much more than what they could have done for if they had never attended their course at all. It's a difficult question, but a question that needs some serious attention. Because, to some degree at least, and maybe an alarming degree, higher education is nothing more than a system that functions to drive up the cost of labour for certain professions, just like in my retail example. The Nobel Prize-winning economist, Milton Friedman, stated in his Rights of Workers speech that it was in fact the unions who originally pushed for the licensing of given professions, and indeed to deliberately achieve the very perverse effect of artificially inflating the incomes of those members whose interests they represented. Frankly, I found Milton Friedman's statement alarming, but believable. Here are some other notes. False filtering, a hidden problem. Unnecessary education has another and more hidden concerning effect. Not only do educational demands function as a barrier to accessing a given profession, but they also function as a filter. Making people go through long and strenuous tertiary courses naturally filters certain kinds of people into a profession and certain kinds out. If you create a tedious tertiary course, for example, it may then have the general effect of filtering out people who do not have an overly strong craving for money, because the pain is just not worth the gain for them. Or, conversely, it could filter in people who maybe lack curiosity. the kind that seems more tolerant to years of heavy boredom. Now, all that would be okay if the filter was in fact ideal, screening the right people in and the right people out of a given field. But if you create unnecessary educational demands, then there's every chance your filters will not be ideal. If a course is developmentally irrelevant in itself, then there's a chance you'll be blocking the wrong people out of given professions and for possibly the wrong reasons. Worse, in some cases you may even filter specifically wrong people into them. Relative value, the educational arms race. The infatuation that modern society seems to have with education, that is, the kind of education that comes with certificates, has led to a kind of educational arms race where young people find themselves striving for an ever more advanced qualification, and only to the end of differentiating themselves from every other guy who now has a degree. Which is simply crazy when the modern economy mostly is, and must be, a truck driver, food preparation, toilet cleaning, form ticking, construction worker economy, etc. Investing in education that is not relevant is just poison to equality, and incredibly wasteful. For sure, people should have equal rights to compete for government scholarships, to attend certain courses so as to acquire skills of specific national interest. But outside that, the subsidies should be removed. The taxpayer should never be asked to invest in waste and artificial wage inflation. Not to mention the meaningless costs to the students, enforcing them through an ultimately irrelevant and artificially extended education process. Conclusion. An ideal education system is a system that is directly demand responsive. We need to link it closely to the real professional demands of the individual's career. And it should evolve alongside the demands of the individual's career, with the career itself directing the learning content. We need a lesser focus on students spending years in tertiary institutes and a greater focus on learning akin to the apprenticeship model. This is the best way to be sure that we're not wasting money and time with irrelevance. This is how it works in Switzerland, I will add, or much more so, and they are one of the most prosperous and sophisticated societies in the industrialized world. But what about learning that is not for the professions, and is merely a social good, I hear you say? All I can say to that is go for a stroll down to the public library, or keep listening to my videos. That kind of learning can be, and should be, free. And free in the real meaning of the word, not just free because someone else was forced to pay for it. Thank you.